Good afternoon. So today we are going to talk about how this wasteland came into entity. I mean, how the idea entered the mind of the poet, and why did he write this poem? Already, I have told you a number of things about the 20th century. I mean, the society and the 20th century literature, right? So let us talk about the beginning of the poem. I mean how the poem came into entity. See, you know very well that The Wasteland is one of the most celebrated poems of the 20th century, right? And you can call it a landmark in the history of the 20th century English poetry because it has got a unique place in the 20th century, and that's why, Eliot was given the Nobel Prize for this poem. Then, if you try to go through the poem, you'll find that it's a long poem of about 440 lines, and at the same time, it has been divided into five sections. The first one is the burial of the dead, and the second one is a game of chess. The third one is the fire sermon, and the fourth one is death by water. And the last one, I mean the fifth section is what the thunder said, right? So these are the five sections of the poem covering around 400 and you know 40 lines, right? Again, if you try to go through all the five sections, you'll find that all the five sections they seem to follow a principle of you just can say rhetorical discontinuity, and it reflects the fragmented experience of the 20th century sensibility of the great modern cities of the wasteland, right? Or here the wasteland is basically the west. Fine. So there is not a kind of, a logical, I mean, continuity in the poem, and that's why I'm saying that it follows the principle of a rhetorical discontinuity. Fine. And in the poem, T.S. Eliot, he presents the hopelessness and boredom of the modern wastelanders. Right. Now, regarding the idea of the poem or regarding the writing of the poem, you'll find that Eliot wrote it in the autumn of 1921, and this was a very critical time in the life of T.S. Eliot. Why? Because if you remember, in 1921, he fell seriously ill, and he was just recovering from this serious illness, and this illness was caused by some family problems, and due to some overwork, right? Again, this was the time when he lost his wife, and if you remember, she died in a mental hospital. So the neurosis that has been presented by his wife in his personal life, the same neurosis he presents in the poem. Getting my point. So this is one of the most important qualities of the wastelanders. I mean, neurosis, neurosis. Psychologically, people are weak in the modern society, so they are the victims of neurosis, right? Now, in addition to these problems, which problems? I mean, personal problems, I mean, family problems, and the death of his wife. So, in addition to these problems, the First World War, it also made a horrific and terrific impact on the mind of the poet. Fine. So, all these things. I mean, his personal health, then the death of his wife, then the horrific and terrific impacts of the First World War. So all these things combining together, they, filled his bosom with gloom and despair. So whatever gloom and despair and bleakness he had in his bosom at this particular time, he reflected all these things through this wasteland. So the inside resembles the outside. From the inside, he was not feeling well, and that's why this, situation, this critical situation, he reflected through the wasteland, right? And that's why if you go through the poem, you'll find that it presents a bleak and gloomy picture of the human predicament, right? It shows rootlessness, it shows isolation and alienation, it shows, envy, boredom, frustration, and sexual perversion of human beings in the modern society. So it basically deals with human predicament. I think I have already talked about it. The poem deals with human predicament which remains same in all the ages. Right. So critics feel that this poem, I mean The Wasteland, it presents the disillusionment of a generation. Actually, F.R. Lewis was the critic who said so. He felt that this poem presents the disillusionment of a generation, and that is the 20th century society. So this is a society which is inhabited by the wastelanders. I mean, they do not have the sense of, right and wrong. Fine, they do not believe in relationships. They do not believe in God. They do not believe in goodness of things. So they are working like automatons. They are without any feelings and emotions. They are lost. They are isolated. Right? So they all are disillusioned. Disillusioned. That's why F.R. Lewis says that this poem presents the disillusionment of a generation, and that is the 20th century generation or the modern age. Right. Now, regarding its publication, you'll find that it was published in the serial form for the very first time, and it was published in the Criterion. In the Criterion, it's a journal, and it was in October and November 1922. Right. Now, before its publication, Eliot sent it to Ezra Pound. I have already told you that they both were good friends, and Ezra Pound was a great admirer of T.S. Eliot. So, before publishing it, Eliot sent the poem, I mean the rough draft of the poem, to Ezra Pound for some suggestions and some modifications and some improvements, right? And Ezra Pound made a number of modifications and improvements in the poem, and finally, it was reduced to half of its original length. Right. It means he made great, modifications in the poem. Right. And now if you remember the publication of the poem, it raised hostile criticism at that time. So the poem was harshly criticized by, most of the newspapers, and it was criticized by a number of critics at that time. So I'm not going into the detail. I'll be just quoting three or four critics or three or four newspapers. Right? See, New Statesman. Uh, it said that this wasteland. It is several separate poems. Several separate poems means there is no coherence in the poem. There is no link in the poem. And it seems as if so many poems have been combined together. Right? That's why New Statesman said that it is, as if several separate poems have been combined together. Right? Then the scrutinies. It said that the wasteland is a set of small poems which have been tagged together. I mean, somehow the same thing which has been said by, you know, the statesman. Is that clear? Then Times Literary Supplement. Uh, it issued a very harsh statement about the wasteland. What did it say? It said, I'm just quoting, it was nothing but parodying without taste or skill. So, just parodying, and that also without any taste or any skill. Right. So, the statesman, I mean, this paper supported the very idea of Times Literary Supplement, and it gave something additional also. So it said that, it was not only, a kind of parodying without taste or skill, but it further added that, these parodies are cheap and the imitations are inferior, right? Then there is a critic Lucas, E.V. Lucas. E.V. Lucas said that in writing, The Wasteland, Eliot found his inspiration in literature rather than in life. So he should have found his inspiration in life rather than in literature. But he did it in a reversed manner. What he did? He found his inspiration in literature rather than in life. Right. Uh, then, if you remember, the poem, it does not have any rural setting. And for this thing also, the poem was very much criticized. So what I mean to say is that, it was also criticized for its urban setting, right? And if you go through the poem, you'll find that it shows Eliot's, attraction for the urban squalor. So he deals with the urban society, and there also he presents the urban society in a very dirty manner. I mean, he deals with the squalor, with the fret and fever of the urban society, right? So it was, I mean, very harshly criticized by a number of newspapers and critics, and finally it was called, scholarly nonsense, and people felt that it would pass away with the passage of time. It would sink, or it would gradually, pass away, right? But it did not happen because Eliot was fated to get more and more, recognition. So with the passage of time, its value and its importance. I mean, they were recognized by some new critics like F.R. Lewis and Clint Brooks and some other critics. And finally, this poem came to be called the most important poem of the 20th century, and it came to be called the most talked about document of the 20th century. And if you remember, it has also been called an epic of the modern age. So it got somehow the status of an epic of the modern age. Right. Now, what is special in the poem? Why, it was hailed so gently towards, I mean, after its initial publication. See, the very fact is that, the poem presents the age truly and in its naked form, right? Eliot does not take the help of any imagination. I mean, he does not coat anything with sugar, right? So he presents the life in its naked form. I mean, as he sees the life, I mean, he presents it in its reality. Is that clear? And if you go through the poem, you'll find that it shows how human beings in the modern society are living, how they are turned into machines and automatons, how they have lost faith in everything, how they have lost faith in relationship in God, and in any kind of, goodness, how they are feeling lost and alienated, how they feel that they belong to nobody and nobody belongs to them. So they have become true wastelanders, right? And they have given way to sexual perversion, right? So you just can say that, as F.R. Lewis has already said, that it presents the disillusionment of a generation. Fine. And another new critic, that is Clint Brooks, he says that this wasteland presents a sigh for the vanished glory of the past, though it is not true. What Clint Brooks is trying to say, he's trying to say that the past was very glorious and the present is not glorious, but this is wrong. So sins were committed in the past also, murders were there in the past also, and conspiracies were there in the past also, and the same things are happening in the modern society. But the main difference between the past and the present is that, you will come to know about it in Auden also, because he also presents a kind of dichotomy between the past and the present. So the dichotomy between the past and the present is that in the past, if people committed sins, they repented and they wished for salvation. And for this, they were ready to suffer. But in the modern society, people are not ready to suffer, and they do not wish for any kind of salvation. And, you know, they never try to repent. Why? The thing is that now they are raising a big question mark on the entity of the Almighty. I have already told you how, the 20th century was impacted by the theories of Charles Darwin. And, Darwin said that, I mean, we are not the children of Adam and Eve. Rather, we have been created due to a scientific, process. So it raises a big question mark on the entity of the Almighty. It means there is no God. I mean, that is the faith of modern human beings, and that's why now they have started using their own free will, right? And when you use your free will, you do not care for anyone, right? So Clanbrooke said that this poem presents a sigh for the vanished glory of the past. It means the past was glorious, and now this glorious past has vanished, right? And Clint Brooks also says that the basic theme of the poem is life in death, living death. I'll be talking about it in detail while talking about various themes of the wasteland. Fine. Life in death, living death. It simply means that physically we are alive, but spiritually we are dead. Fine. So this is a kind of life in death. Fine. Then the poem has also been appreciated by I.A. Richards, and he appreciates it for its musical quality. And he calls it music of ideas due to its musical qualities, right? Then, if you try to have a look at the epigraph of the poem, you'll find that it comes from Satyricon. It's a satire written by Petronius, and this satire, it depicts the story of Sibyl. Sibyl. I hope you remember who were Sibyls. Sibyls were, they were prophetic women. Fine. And one of the Sibyls was the Sibyl of Cumae, and she was the beloved of Apollo. And one day, Apollo was very happy with her, and he said, "Okay, Sibyl, um, you can have anything from my side. I mean, I can fulfill your one wish." Sibyl said, "Okay, then make me immortal, my lord." Now the poor lady, she forgot to have the maintenance of youth, right? So due to the words of Apollo, he was God. So due to the words of Apollo, she became immortal, but she forgot to have the maintenance of youth. So what happened with the passage of time, her age kept growing. Fine. So with the passage of time, she became old, with a wrinkled face, a lean body. She started looking like a skeleton. Now she was in pain. She was having a stick in her hand and she was in utter pain. Now she wanted to die. But death was not possible to her because now, due to the words of Apollo, she had become immortal. Right? So when you go through the original lines of this epigraph, you will find that some children, they went to Sibyl and they asked, Sibyl, what do you want? Then Sibyl answered, I want to die. But this was not possible to her because due to the boon or due to the words of Apollo, she had already become immortal. So, this exactly is the situation of human beings in the modern society. Today, in the modern society, we all are in pain. We are suffering from a number of, things. We are suffering from isolation or alienation or boredom or frustration or despair or any other thing. So, our situation is, we wish to die. So, we want to die. This exactly was the situation of Sibyl of Cumae. And that's why if you remember in the modern society, suicide rate is increasing, day by day. You might have seen it in William Faulkner, and he is one of the main pillars of the 20th century, literature. So this feeling of committing suicide, it is gradually entering the very minds of modern human beings. Is that clear? So that is the epigraph of, the poem, which is from Satyricon, right? Then, if you talk about this poem, you'll find that the poem is mythical in its nature. Eliot got help from a number of myths, right? But he took help from two particular books, and these are, the first one is From Ritual to Romance, and it is written by Jessie Weston, and the other is The Golden Bow, and it has been written by James Frazier, right? So, from the first book, that is From Ritual to Romance, he takes you know the legend of the Grail and the Fisher King story. Fine. And from the other book, that is The Golden Bow, written by James Frazier, he adopts some myths of vegetation like that of Attis, Adonis, and Osiris. Attis, Adonis, and Osiris. The myth of Adonis you have already gone through in uh, you know the elegy written by B.B. Shelley. Fine. Now these myths and legends, they basically serve as the objective correlative for the poet's emotions and feelings. In the previous clip, I talked about it. So I'll elaborate further how these myths and legends, how they are serving as the objective correlative for the feelings and emotions of the poet, right? So in the next clip, I'll be coming with these myths, that of the Holy Grail, then the myth of the Fisher King, and then that of Attis, then Adonis, and then Osiris. And in addition to these myths, I'll be coming with the mythical figure Tiresias, because without Tiresias, the wasteland is absolutely incomplete. Fine. So thank you and good day.